All right, there we go. Okay, so welcome to the Friday folks who are now watching us. All right, so today for the psychodynamic frame of reference, what do we know so far? You guys have already done some reading, a little bit of thinking about this psychodynamic frame of reference. What do we think of when we think of this psychodynamic way of approaching rehab? Let me make it a little easier for you. Like, what are all the cartoons like? You know, the psychoanalysis cartoons. What do you see? Daron?
It's like the client laying on the couch talking about emotions.
Right, the person on the couch. Emotions, that's key. We think about emotions, about talking about our feelings, right? What else? What else do you think about when you think about psychodynamic therapy? It sometimes has a negative stigma to it, as does all mental health, and that's something that we're trying very hard to combat these days. Yes, it's gotten better, but still a problem. So, I will say, if you say something to me, I might be repeating it just because this gizmo is probably not going to pick up your voice. So I'll just repeat that. Okay. So these days we think oftentimes of homeless people who, have mental health issues. Yeah. So we might be thinking about how can we help people deal with their emotions. What else does psychodynamic get into that makes it contrasted to, say, something like cognitive behavioral? Cognitive behavioral is all about the here and now. What does psychodynamic get into? The past. It digs into your past. It lets you work through unresolved conflicts and problems, right? So that's what psychodynamic is about quite a bit. It's also about passion, okay? The book was really good at pointing out that there's really no other frame of reference that talks about the passions, the drives, the emotions, the feelings that we have that lead us in one direction or another, because we are led quite a bit by our feelings. And sometimes that can be a really good thing. One of the things we learned about in neuro is the way that feelings are involved in both decision-making and memory. Our emotions guide both of those cognitive activities. So passion is really important. And how we express that and how we get in touch with that. If you don't have some of these slides, you might have downloaded your PowerPoint early. I've been working on these a little bit, so if there are some slides here that you don't have, you probably can go and re-download your version, and it will have some of these slides on it, because I see everybody furiously typing. So, okay. Do you have this one?
I just opened it now.
Okay, that means I probably need to go back and re-upload it. I will make sure that you have those. So don't feel like you have to type furiously to get everything that's on the slide. I'll make sure that you've got the correct copy of it. So here are some theorists in OT that have worked on talking about passion, the human spirit, the ways people connect emotionally to what they do, to their occupations. Betty Hasselkuss, with her Swivl lecture in 2006, talked about the world of everyday occupation. You may not remember, but we touched on that back when we did Issues 1, and her talking about the importance that everyday occupations have to people. The fiddlers in the 60s were huge in developing the psychodynamic frame of reference for OTs and talking about the way the unconscious communicates with us through activities. Gail was an occupational therapist. Jay, I think, was a psychologist or psychiatrist. He was a psychiatrist. And so they developed a lot of the psychodynamic approaches in occupational therapy. Ann Mosey, who is just all over early theory in occupational therapy, of course, her analytical frame of reference is very much in line with the psychodynamic way of thinking of things. And guess what? When we read the book, I noticed that there's a couple of names there that I recognized. They actually referred to an article that I wrote with my husband in 1997, which is still the most cited article. And my husband has like over 50 publications. And it is his second most cited article, so I'm kind of excited about that. It's, of course, my most cited article, but I've only published 3, so, yeah, you know. But we talked a lot about what does spirituality mean in occupational therapy, and what is the importance of the human spirit in giving you meaning and in making a difference. And our book authors said that that's a lot like talking about how our ego seeks to express passion, okay? That there's a close correlation. So what does that tell us about the psychodynamic frame of reference? What might be a good occupation-based model to pair with psychodynamic frame of reference? I think the CMOP, you don't have to whisper it, but I do. I think the CMOP is a good choice. It's not the only one. I mean, you look at Moho, and it has the volition piece of it. That could actually fall under kind of that thinking about passion. But I really do think that some of the models that focus on spirituality or what gives a person meaning, kind of looking at the reasons behind what we do, pair well with psychodynamic. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about some of the assumptions behind the psychodynamic. You may or may not like Freud. Some people have a big thing against Freud. Actually, it's funny that we got cited for this because my husband, being a sociologist, thinks that Freud is just a bunch of hooey, so it kind of cracks me up. But as I read through this, it's like, yes, it's a theory. You can't prove, you can't look inside someone's head and prove whether they've got an id, ego, or superego, but we can see evidence of that in the way people behave, and it's simply a frame of reference for helping us think about some of the ways people behave, okay? So there's a little diagram here that kind of helps us think about the id, superego, and ego. And the id is the I want to do that now way of thinking. The superego says it's not right to do that. So it's angel and devil, right? The angel and devil on your shoulder. I want it. No, you can't have it. And then the ego says, well, maybe we can compromise. Maybe we can figure something out. So let's delve into these just a little bit more. The id is all about the unconscious. It's about the unconscious mind rising to the surface. This can be primitive drives and instincts, needs and conflicts, and is thought to operate through primary process thinking, which is illogical and undisciplined and kind of random, and looks for immediate gratification. So dreams use primary process thinking. Anybody here see the movie Inception? Okay, how about Interstellar? I actually just watched Interstellar this weekend, and they were both, I think, directed by the same person, so they have a lot of the same vibe. And I feel like that they're a good way to think about primary process thinking, Interstellar or Inception, because in Inception they go deep down into the dream world, and everything that happens is a dream, and you pretty much just have to accept it. That whole suspending disbelief and you know, because wild things happen, like the world curves upward and you know, strange things happen. There's a moment in Interstellar where the same thing happens. Our hero Cooper gets stuck in the middle of a black hole, and he discovers that he's not just you know, it's not just emptiness, it's not just a void, but he's inside of his daughter's bookcase from you know, when she was a child, and he's communicating with his past self and his daughter through pushing books out of the bookcase or making the dust go in binary code to try to explain what's going on to her. So it's this really weird dream, almost dream sequence kind of thing. And there's a point in there where he's inside the bookcase and he's trying to find where to go. And he can't figure it out. He's trying logically to figure it out and he can't. And finally he goes, love will guide me. And he heads off toward his daughter. It's a very psychodynamic moment, okay? The whole idea of passion and, you know, forget the logic. There's just no logic to this. It's all about where do my passions take me. So if you want to think about what is the id, think about Interstellar and Inception and some of those weird moments. And if you haven't seen them, I recommend those are good movies to reward yourself with when you are done writing your paper. So those might be good things. Okay. Now the ego, that's the logical part, okay? And this is the part that other people see. This is our self. Ego is kind of the self that everybody else can see and identify with. It functions logically, and it's always working to exert this control over the id and the superego and trying to find that balance, Okay? It operates on secondary processes. The secondary processes are things you learn through experience. It's the things you can logic through, that you can use your judgment and your discipline to go through that. So the side of you, the devil side that gets up in the morning and says, I don't want to work out, and the superego says, but you need to work out. It's good and healthy and, you know, makes you a better person. And the ego says, all right, I'll put on my gym clothes and I'll do a little bit at least, you know. So that's that discipline. If you're going to be disciplined and try to do the right thing, it's the ego that's making those choices. Now, the superego is that moral compass, that what is socially acceptable part of the person, that social component. It can be illogical and idealistic. That's our perfectionistic side, the side that wants to keep working on the assignment up until some of you are like this. I know not all of you are like this, but you want to work on the assignment to the last minute to get everything perfect as much as possible. In fact, I'm kind of this way too. I might have told you guys this moment before when I was going through my post-professional graduate program, and my daughter said, you know, she found me working away, and she's like, well, how much is this assignment worth? And I'm like, 5 points. And she's like, Mom, walk away. You know, she's like, you've done 5 points worth. You know, move away from the computer. And I'm like, yeah, you're probably right. So, yeah, the superego can be idealistic and perfectionistic. And sometimes we need to let the id take over and tell us, okay, or the ego take over and tell us, okay, good enough. Oftentimes it's our parent tapes that take us there, the parent information that keeps rattling around our head. You know, you hear that mom voice or that dad voice saying things. Or our culture. Our culture often drives the superego as well. Okay, so remember our, oh yeah, Darian. Those were blanks. Did you? I am so sorry. Okay. Yeah, you should be writing down the highlighted words. Okay. All right. I'm so sorry that you don't have that. I was sure that I got that in there for you. I will make sure that you have it, though. Okay. All right. So remember occupational adaptation and our toddler who wants the cookie? Okay, so if we were going to use psychodynamic with that little guy, the id is going to say, I need that cookie. I have a drive to get that cookie. But the superego is the one that says, Mom says no. Okay? And the ego says, how can I still get the cookie and not make Mom mad? If she doesn't know about it, it'll be all right. Okay? Or maybe it's worth the punishment. You know, maybe it's worth the time out to eat the cookie. So that's an example for us. Okay. So another topic, we're moving on from the id, ego, superego, and now we're going to be talking about psychic energy and anxiety. Okay. So psychic energy, what that means is basically energy of the mind, energy of the psyche. Okay. And just like with any energy that we have a finite amount. Some of us have more than others. It's just the energy that we have. We have two kinds, libido and aggression, and we'll talk a little bit more about those. And we'll talk about anxiety a bit more too. But our psychic energy, as I said, is limited. And it must be shared by the id, the ego, and the superego. So all three of those areas have to share that energy. Now, if you have unresolved conflicts in your past, that psychic energy is going to get sucked up taking care of that, of the unresolved conflicts from the past. Okay? And the person will cease to function. So that's where you see the mental illness come in. So that is Freud's way of thinking about disability, that if the psychic energy is being sucked up elsewhere to deal with unresolved conflicts, then the person isn't able to move forward. Okay. All these slides that you don't have, I will provide you. Okay. I think the thing I'll do is just give you my PowerPoint, so you'll have all of those. All right. So don't worry about it. I know you're typing furiously at the moment. I'll make sure you have those. Okay. So libido, we've probably all heard that term before, right? It's amazing how many of these terms are just in popular culture. that we can pick up. And I know many of you were psych majors in undergraduate too, so you've definitely studied all this stuff. But libido is the good psychic energy. This is the sexual energy that perpetuates life, that is for intimate and love and reproduction and basically for any productivity that a person has. It's also called the life force. It's part of the id. It's considered to be part of those drives, those needs that we have. Okay, we need to have, this libido is what helps us accomplish those needs that we have, to get those needs that we have. This is like Luke and Leia, okay? So we're going to use a Star Wars analogy. So if you want to think about libido, think about Luke and Leia. They have brother and sisterly love, of course, but they're the good side of the force. They're the life force. They're the seeking out happiness and well-being and making things right, okay? Aggression is the death force. This is the hostility, the hatred, the urge to destroy. It needs to be self-sufficient and it distances itself from others. Okay, so this is our independent, pull yourself up by your bootstraps part, as well as the destructive part of us. It's also part of the id. Now, the interesting thing about both libido and aggression is that they seek to express themselves through objects. Okay, so think of this, a good way to think about this would be artistic expression. Okay, we've all seen the beautiful artistic expressions and we've all seen the angry artistic expressions. But people can do this in other ways too. People form attachments to objects that are important to them. Think of your childhood teddy bear or your, whatever your lovey was when you were little. You probably had an object, a doll, a stuffed animal, a blankie that you were attached to. Okay, so you express this, you can express your libido through objects. You can also express your anger through objects. Think of a little kid kicking down a tower, okay? Or how good it feels to hit something when you're mad. And hopefully it's a pillow and not your brother or sister. So, okay. And this is like, of course, Darth Vader and Kylo Ren. Everybody knows that Kylo Ren, Adam Driver, went to UIndy for a year, right? Isn't that cool? So yeah, maybe he'll come back sometime and, I don't know, talk to us. But these guys are what we think of, they're going to be our symbol of the death force, okay? So to control these two drives in socially appropriate ways, we need the ego, okay? The ego looks at socially appropriate expression. The superego is also involved in what's morally correct and what's going to be right, and also tries to guide the libido and the aggressive energies into ways that are expressed appropriately. And this would be the light side and the dark side combating with each other. So you can think of Luke and Darth Vader and their epic lightsaber battle to try to help you remember that libido and aggression are controlled, okay? The ego tries to bring those two together and figure out what to do with them. Now, here's your example. Think of our toddler and his cookie. He doesn't get his cookie, so he throws a temper tantrum. Might be appropriate for if you're 4 and under, but I haven't seen one of you throw a temper tantrum when you don't get your way in class. You find socially appropriate ways of expressing when you don't get your way or when you don't get what you want. So the superego dictates that need to control yourself. It says, control yourself. It wouldn't be appropriate to scream right now. And the ego says, all right, well then I'm going to say I'm having a bad day. I hope you'll just understand, but I just need to not finish this conversation right now. Or you're going to find ways of expressing yourself in words or actions that are appropriate. And it's the superego that tells you that you need to do that. No screaming now. Yelling at Brenda is not going to help. I just need to tell her how I'm feeling at the moment and have a conversation, or just wait a while until I'm not quite as angry, and then we'll have that conversation. And this would be Yoda, okay? You know how Luke is kind of wild at the beginning of the first Star Wars movie, and he's so passionate, he's so excited about everything, and he just wants to make it all better. And Yoda says, hold on, you need to learn to control the Force first. You're not going to be ready to go out there and combat evil until you learn to control the Force. And Yoda, of course, always, lamented the loss of Darth Vader and wanted to bring him back into the fold, as a light side Jedi if at all possible. So think of this control as being Yoda. Okay? All right. So we've talked about psychic energy. Let's talk about anxiety a little bit now. According to Freud, anxiety is always pathological. It's never a good thing. But it's an alerting response. It's basically the thing that happens that lets us know that something is wrong and that we need to make a change. It's also, according to Freud, the fear that the id might take over. Okay? So the ego acts to defend itself, and it puts out these ego defense mechanisms. Okay? An example of that would be acting out, and there are a whole list of other different types of the defense mechanisms that people can exhibit that we're not going to go into in lecture. The main thing I want you to be able to do with all those different defense mechanisms is recognize that a defense mechanism comes from anxiety and the ego's need to protect itself. Okay? If you end up in a mental health setting, all those different defense mechanisms are probably things you're going to want to learn about and spend more time learning about. For our purposes, you will get to take a look at them for your case study today. We're going to do a little case study later on, but I'm not going to go over them so much in lecture. Now, depression, you've probably heard this phrase before, but we're putting it in context of the psychodynamic frame of reference now, but depression is anger turned inward. Okay? So it's the ego, rather than being able to defend itself and trying to figure out what to do with that aggression, turns it inward on oneself. And according to Freud, the person gets angry at themselves and gets into this depression as a result. Okay, again, the ego is the self. Okay, so here are some assumptions for us. We're going to go through these assumptions rather quickly because they're very well laid out in the textbook. But there are 12 functions of the ego, and we're going to talk about a few of them on the next slide. One aspect of the psychodynamic frame of reference is a way of thinking called object relations, or how people relate to objects. And this is a huge piece of the OT history. Remember we talked about Gale and Jay Fiedler back on the slide when we had the history? They talk a lot about how, in this frame of reference, it's important to think about how humans relate to other humans and how we also relate to non-humans in our therapeutic environment. Okay? So it's all about relationships. And they refer to that as object relations. So all that to say, from that perspective, as part of the psychodynamic frame of reference, it's all about a person's ability to relate to others and relate appropriately to things in their own environment. And if they can't do that, then that's when they might need intervention from an occupational therapist. Okay. And as part of that, when we're looking at humans and non-humans in our environment, we look at actual properties, but we also look at symbolic properties. Okay? So think about that teddy bear again, or that lovey that you had when you were a little kid, or maybe that a niece or nephew would have now. First of all, what are some of the properties of that object that make them attached to that object? Just the actual properties of that object. I'm guessing that all of you had a soft lovey. That my kids had like a blankie, and it was soft. I mean, nobody wants to. Very few people, I would think, would want to cuddle up with a block. You know, they usually pick something cuddly and soft. They like the soothing physical properties. Now, what are some of the symbolic properties of that same object? When you think about that object, do you get any warm, fuzzy feelings? What do you think about? What? Who gave it to you? Yes. So it could have been mom, dad, brother, sister, grandparent. But there's some attachment there about the person who gave it to you. You might even have a stuffed animal you got as an older person that you have sentimental attachment to because it's connected to an event or a person. It reminds you of that time you went to the fair and you won at the coin toss or whatever, got the animal, or someone gave you that as a gift. What else might you think of? You think of like warm, cuddly times when you were, cuddled up watching a favorite TV show, or, cuddled with someone you love, or, there's a connection there with that object and some happy memories. So the object itself has its own actual qualities, and it also has some symbolic qualities, the meanings behind the object. And it's that way for everything we encounter in our environment. Here are some of the ego psychology concepts that the ego does. Okay, so reality testing, sense of self, thought processes, competence and mastery, judgment, self-control, and defensive mechanisms. Okay, so I'm not going to go into the meaning of these so much at this point in time because, again, they're all well laid out in the textbook. But the point that I want to make about these is, okay, so these are aspects that the ego controls, that the ego does. They're a little more observable than looking at the id or looking at the superego. So oftentimes when OTs are looking at assessment, they're looking at these sorts of things. Can the person test reality? Are they exhibiting judgment? Do they have self-control? Are they exhibiting mature defense mechanisms, or are they exhibiting defense mechanisms that are counterproductive and harmful to them? These are things we can see a whole lot more than what's going on inside the id and what's going on inside the superego. People even are not, it's in this unconscious mind. People are not aware of what's going on always in their id and in their superego. I mean, if I ask you about your culture, okay, you might be able to tell me 1 or 2 points, and then you're like, I don't know, I'm an American. But if I ask you to tell me about someone else's culture who's very different from you, you can pick out aspects of their culture, but your own culture is so ingrained that it's hard to pick out. I think if you haven't had it already, you will have, in therapeutic skills, an exercise where you actually look at your own culture. And I know that was one of the things that when I did therapeutic skills with a group, they were like, I don't know what my own culture is. And you really have to think about it to bring it to the surface because these are more unconscious. And it's easier to measure these aspects of the ego than it is to look at those other aspects of a person. This is just a reminder that this all came from these psychosexual stages, okay? And again, this is not something I'm focusing on so much because this is very much in the realm of psychology. If you're a psych major, you probably had these memorized at some point in time. The part that I want to look at the most is if people are regressing, what kinds of things do we see? And according to Freud, psychosis is way back to the oral stage, neurosis, anal stage, and then the whole Oedipal complex, more the phallic stage. But if people are dealing with guilt or responsibility issues, those are more later on in the developmental stages. So just to kind of remind us of where this all came from, that there are these psychosexual stages for people. Psychodynamic assumptions about people is that people have both a conscious and an unconscious mind, and we've talked about that a little bit already. And it's the unconscious mind that influences our behavior. We see the influence of people's unconscious mind in the behavior that they exhibit. And it's not always under conscious control. Have you ever reacted to something and then thought, like maybe got mad at somebody or something, and then thought later, why did I fly off like that? You know, why did that id come to the surface during that moment? And maybe they touched a nerve. We've talked about this before, that often it can be a brother or sister who knows how to push your buttons. And they push your buttons and you react before you even know, and it's not the thing that they just did that made you react, it's the history that you have with them that made you react, that's in your unconscious. And you react, and then later you go, why do I always react in the same way to that person when they do that thing that annoys me so much? And it's because of this, you really have to bring it to the surface and work through it in order for the ego to be able to control it. Okay. Everything we do in this frame of reference is done in order to gratify a need. So that's the drive, okay? And it's not always things that people are consciously aware of, like we were just talking about. People have this innate need to achieve gratification. Okay. So it even goes all the way back to infancy. The infant is looking for ways to satisfy its needs, and that's that oral stage. And then that sense of self-worth then comes from intrinsic satisfaction of having those needs met. Okay. The more a child can experience the world out there, the more they understand themselves, their own potential and limitations, and the greater adaptability that they'll have. So it's all about the interactions and the opportunities that people have. People who don't have as many opportunities may not be able to develop psychologically, according to this frame of reference, if not given those opportunities. You have to have that interaction in order to gain those. So that takes us very much back into the world of OT. Sounds a lot like occupational adaptation. Sounds a lot like EHP as well. So you can kind of start seeing some occupation-based models come into this. The more we interact with the environment, rub shoulders with the environment, the more it changes us, and the more we understand about our own potential. And that's very much a part of this frame of reference as well. Okay. There are 3 dimensions for OT. Okay, so now we're getting away from the basic assumptions of this model and starting to think about how does it work for OT. Okay, the main thing that an OT is going to be concerned with when they're using the psychodynamic frame of reference in the clinic is all about intrapersonal, interpersonal, and activity aspects. It's all about those relationships. Remember how I was talking about the fiddlers and object relations? Here's where we bring it to the present. That was the past, and it's very much the same way in the present now. Intrapersonal, we're looking at how does the person relate to themselves. Okay. Interpersonal, how is the person relating to other people? And then activity aspects, how is the person relating to engaging in occupation or in activity? How is one using those activities to express themselves? Do they have an appropriate way to do that? Okay. So symbols, again, very important in this frame of reference, are all about connecting the inner life and the consciousness with their collective belief system. So it's that, getting insight. This is all about getting insight into that inner life and how they then connect to the world and understanding meaning that the activity has for the person. These 2 phrases here are all about, I think it's on the next slide. Nope, it's a little ways down, but it's all about insight. It's all about the person being able to gain insight into what's going on behind the scenes so that they can get an understanding of how that activity gives them meaning and then what to do about that. Okay. So function is when the person's needs are met and they're pretty much free of all these conflicts and fixations and they can behave in socially acceptable ways. They have positive ways of using their energy, they're able to work productively, and they have a strong sense of self. The main piece of that is that they satisfy their needs and they can do things that are socially acceptable. Okay, the Wi-Fi is busy, it says, of course. All right. Yay, it worked. Okay, so dysfunction is when there's an imbalance of psychic energy, inadequate development, the person does have conflicts and fixations, or they don't have those ego skills. Remember those skills we had up there with judgment and back when we were talking about, and I'm not going to flip it because I'm afraid it's going to freak out, but it's not having those ego skills is dysfunction, or that imbalance of psychic energy. Those are all ways the person can be dysfunctional. So the big picture for OT is that it's the ego that we're looking at to both be evaluated and developed. We can't change what's going on in the id or the superego. Okay, the only thing that can change that is that interaction with the environment over time. But we can work on looking at the ego, how it's and we can evaluate it, and we can figure out how we want to develop it, how we want to help the person develop that. There's the insight. It's all about the insight. Okay? Self-understanding and the ability to reflect. So all those times we ask you to write reflection papers, it actually is from a psychodynamic frame of reference. And the whole premise of that is that we believe that those skills, those ego skills, can be learned. Okay? So in assessment, the hypothesis for this is that unconscious intrapsychic conflicts are causing the inappropriate expressions that people have. All right? And to assess that, we want to do some things that bring out people's feelings. Okay? So it's a lot of picture collage and family drawings and kinetic house tree person drawings, and there's a lot of art kinds of assessments that are used in the psychodynamic frame of reference. And there's not always a clear distinction between assessment and intervention, because if we're using something like a picture collage for our assessment to understand what's going on within the person will start to get insight, hopefully, and that insight can be the beginning of intervention for them as they're having insight into what are the issues that are going on with them. Intervention is all about having activities, in OT especially using the activities that bring unconscious material into the conscious mind to understand what's going on. And activities are selected for the symbolic potential as well as the real potential of providing appropriate interaction and expression. A good example of this, when I was doing my level 2 fieldwork in a mental health setting, we did a lot of making bread. Okay, bread was fantastic because you have to do the physical kneading of it. You get to work out a lot of aggression, but it's done in a group setting, so you're also working on how can I express myself in a social setting, you know, to get what I need and to finish this task, to accomplish this task. So the bread was, you know, the actual material, but it also represented some of those aggressions, bringing forward to the conscious mind the aggressions that people have. Okay, so our goals are a little different in the psychodynamic frame of reference. We look at identifying unconscious conflicts and fixations, gaining insight into behaviors, beliefs, and values, and developing and practicing ego skills. So there's our insight again. There's, you know, getting insight into those unconscious conflicts and fixations, and then helping them develop the skills that they need to appropriately interact in society. So how to write those goals is going to look a little different than the way we write those biomechanical goals, isn't it? If we're going to use psychodynamic words, we would use some of those ego skills words to represent what we want those people to do, what we want our goals to be. Okay. So, when is the psychodynamic frame of reference useful? It's useful when people are having trouble with social participation, relationships, expressing their emotions appropriately, having motivational problems, if we need them to gain self-awareness, if we need them to get some more appropriate defense mechanisms, and if we need to help them work on expressing themselves appropriately through arts and activities. So a lot of the arts and crafts kinds of things from historically in OT and also present day are very appropriate for use in the psychodynamic frame of reference. Okay, so this is where I get to stop our video. Thank you for watching.